The casket gleamed black under the autumn sun, my son's face peaceful as if merely sleeping. I watched as they lowered him into the earth, each thud of dirt hitting wood echoing through my hollow chest. People squeezed my shoulder, murmured condolences, but their words washed over me like water on stone. I stood there long after most had left, my legs refusing to carry me away from my only child. That's when she approached. Lena, my daughter-in-law of 4 years, clutching my grandson to her chest. Her eyes were dry, makeup perfect despite the occasion. She wore black like the rest of us, but somehow on her it looked more like celebration than mourning. "Eleanor," she said, her voice honey, sweet as she leaned in close. Her breath tickled my ear, warm and intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. "I've been waiting to tell you something." My grandson, my son's supposed legacy, squirmed in her arms, his blue eyes nothing like my son's deep brown ones. "Your grandson isn't his," she whispered, lips curving upward, "and according to the will, I get everything, including your house." The world tilted beneath me. She pressed a folded document into my trembling hands, my son's signature clear at the bottom, the legal text swimming before my tear-blurred vision. "How interesting," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Despite the crushing weight in my chest, I couldn't stop the smile that crept across my face, because in that moment, I remembered something about my son that Lena never understood. He was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. The funeral director approached, asking if we needed anything else. Lena turned away to speak with him, tucking the will into her purse. As she walked off, bouncing my not grandson on her hip, I watched her go, my mind already working, already planning. Because what Lena didn't know was that my quiet, gentle son had come to me 3 months ago, his eyes haunted with a terrible suspicion. He'd asked me questions about family traits, about how strongly our family's eyes and smile had passed through generations. "Mom," he'd said, "I need to know something, and I need you to be completely honest." Now, standing beside his fresh grave, I understood what he'd already known. "It's time to go, Eleanor," Lena called from her sleek black car. "We have paperwork to discuss." I nodded, still smiling. Wait. Before I continue this shocking true story that will leave you speechless by the end, take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to follow this journey to its unbelievable conclusion. Leave a comment with your thoughts so far. What would you do in Eleanor's situation? Now, back to this unbelievable betrayal. My name is Eleanor Paige. I spent 30 years as a high school librarian before retirement, cataloging books and helping young minds discover worlds beyond their reach. My husband died when our son Troy was just 14, leaving me to raise him alone in our modest 2-story home at the edge of town. I was never wealthy, never powerful, never particularly notable. What I was, what I am, is patient and observant. Troy was brilliant from childhood, quiet in a way that fooled people into thinking he was simple. He watched everything, absorbed everything. By 18, he'd earned a full scholarship to study engineering. By 25, he'd created a water filtration system that caught the attention of major development firms. By 30, he'd built enough wealth to retire if he chose. But Troy never cared about money. He cared about solving problems. When he brought Lena home that spring day, I knew something was wrong. Her smile never reached her eyes when she looked at him. Her laugh came too quickly at his jokes. She touched him constantly, but her fingers were always tense against his skin. "She's special, Mom," Troy told me, his eyes bright with a hope I couldn't bear to extinguish. "I've never met anyone like her." They married 6 months later in a ceremony that cost more than my yearly salary. I watched Lena float down the aisle in a gown that whispered across marble floors, her eyes scanning the guests as if taking inventory. "Aren't you happy for me?" Troy asked at the reception, champagne glass in hand. "I want you to be happy," I answered carefully. "That's all I've ever wanted." His smile dimmed slightly. "But you don't like her." "I don't know her," I said. "Give me time." Time showed me plenty. I saw how Lena's spending habits changed once she had access to Troy's accounts. I noticed how often she was visiting friends when Troy worked late. I observed how she managed to be photographed at every charity event but left early, never staying for the actual volunteer work. When they announced her pregnancy 8 months into their marriage, Troy wept with joy. I tried to share his excitement, but something in Lena's triumphant smile made my heart sink. The baby came 2 weeks early according to the doctors, though I had my doubts. Little Gabriel had pale blue eyes and blonde hair, features absent from both our families. When I pointed this out, Troy bristled. Mom, please. Not everyone looks identical to their parents. Genetics are complicated. I backed off, but watched. Watched how Lena's attention to Troy waned after Gabriel's birth. Watched how she began taking longer girls' weekends. Watched how she steered Troy toward buying a new, larger house, insisting they needed the space despite having just the three of them. We might want more children, she'd say, batting her eyelashes. Troy gave her everything she asked for. A new house in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Designer clothes, exotic vacations. He worked longer hours to maintain their lifestyle, coming home exhausted but always making time for Gabriel, reading him stories, building him block towers, loving him fiercely. He's the best thing I've ever done, Troy told me once, watching Gabriel toddle across my living room floor. The pride in his voice broke my heart. 3 months before the accident, Troy started asking strange questions. He wanted to see old family albums. He asked about genetic traits, about whether certain features could skip generations. He became distant, spending hours alone in his home office. Just work, he'd say when I asked, but his eyes held a shadow I recognized, the same one his father had when working through a difficult problem. Then came the accident. A rainy night, a slick road, a truck driver who'd been awake too long. Troy never stood a chance. The first weeks after his death passed in a blur. I functioned on autopilot, handling funeral arrangements, sorting through immediate papers, trying to comfort a grandson who might not share my blood, but still grieved for the only father he'd known. Lena was surprisingly absent during those weeks. Grief? Her mother explained at the funeral. She can't even get out of bed most days. Yet there she was at the cemetery, dry-eyed and composed, whispering her terrible secret with a smile on her face. A week after the funeral, she arrived at my doorstep with 2 men in tailored suits, their expressions professionally sympathetic. Eleanor, Lena said, not bothering to ask if she could come in. These gentlemen are from the estate management firm. We need to discuss the property transfer. I stared at her, still clutching my morning tea. Property transfer? Yes, she said, smiling that empty smile. According to Troy's will, everything transfers to me, including this house. The cup nearly slipped from my fingers. This house, but you have until the end of next month, she continued, inspecting her manicured nails. I'm being generous giving you that long. Legally, I could ask you to leave immediately. One of the men cleared his throat. Mrs. Paige, we understand this is difficult, but the will is very clear. All properties belonging to your son now transfer to his wife. I've lived here for 35 years, I said, my voice small even to my own ears. Troy grew up here. His father built that back deck with his own hands. Lena's expression didn't change. Sentimental value doesn't override legal documents, Eleanor. I'm sure you can find a nice little apartment somewhere, perhaps one of those senior communities. The other man at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. We can provide resources for relocation assistance. The will, I said. I'd like to see it. Lena pulled the same document from her expensive handbag, unfolding it on my kitchen table. As you can see, it's all perfectly legal, signed and witnessed 3 years ago. I scanned the document, taking in my son's familiar signature. Something felt wrong, but in my grief-fogged mind, I couldn't pinpoint what. Why? I asked finally. Why take my home? You have your own house, the one you wanted so badly. She leaned in, dropping her voice despite her companions standing nearby. Because I can. Because everything that was his is now mine. And because I never liked you watching me, judging me with those knowing eyes of yours. I looked past her to the wall where Troy's height measurement still marked his growth from toddler to teenager. And Gabriel? What does he think about moving his grandmother out of the only other home he's known? Something flickered across her face, the first genuine emotion I'd seen. Gabriel will adjust. Children are adaptable. Yes, I said quietly. They certainly are. The men shifted uncomfortably. We'll send the formal documentation next week, one said. Again, we're very sorry for your loss. As they turned to leave, Lena paused at the door. Oh, and Eleanor, don't get any ideas about taking things that aren't yours. I have an inventory of everything valuable in this house. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table for hours, surrounded by memories that Lena now claimed to own. The grandfather clock that had been my wedding gift, the quilt my mother made before she died, the bookshelves Troy and his father built together. But most importantly, I thought about my son's recent behavior before he died. The questions, the late nights, the distracted looks. Troy had suspected something, and knowing my methodical, careful son, he would have done more than just suspect. I needed to find what he'd discovered. I began in the most logical place, Troy's home office in my house, the one he'd maintained even after moving into his larger home with Lena. She'd locked it after the funeral, but I still had the spare key hidden behind the loose baseboard in the hallway. The office looked untouched, papers still scattered across the desk where Troy had left them. I ran my fingers over his chair, remembering how many hours he'd spent here growing up, doing homework, designing his first inventions. For 3 days, I searched. I examined every book, every file folder, every scrap of paper. I checked behind picture frames and underneath drawer linings. Nothing seemed unusual or out of place. On the 4th day, I nearly gave up. Sitting in his chair, I spun slowly, trying to think like my son. Troy never left important things in obvious places. As a child, he'd created elaborate hiding spots for his treasures, a habit that continued into adulthood. My eyes landed on the old wooden chess set on the bookshelf. Troy and his father had played countless games on that board. I lifted it down, examining each piece. The white king felt slightly heavier than it should. I twisted the crown, and it came loose. Inside was a tiny SD card. My hands shook as I inserted it into Troy's computer. It contained a single folder labeled Insurance. Inside were dozens of files, photos, audio recordings, bank statements, and a document titled, For Mom. I opened it first. Mom, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and you've found my hiding spot. I hope I'm wrong about what I've discovered, but if I'm not, you'll need this information. Lena isn't who she pretends to be. Gabriel isn't my biological son, and I have reason to believe they planned it this way from the beginning. The letter detailed how Troy had first grown suspicious when a medical checkup revealed a rare genetic marker in his blood work, one that should have appeared in Gabriel's tests too, but didn't. How he'd hired a private investigator who uncovered Lena's past, 3 previous relationships with wealthy men, all ending abruptly once she'd secured assets. Most damning were the recorded conversations between Lena and someone named Drew, discussing their long game and how they'd hit the jackpot with this one. My heart cracked reading Troy's words. I love Gabriel, regardless of biology. I'll always be his father in every way that matters. But I need to protect him, and you, from what Lena might do. At the end of the letter was a name, Mateo Reyes, with an address in the city and the note, "Trust only him with this information." I closed the computer, the SD card clutched in my palm. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something beyond grief, purpose. The next morning, I visited this Mateo Reyes. His office was small, tucked away on the 3rd floor of an aging building downtown. The plaque on his door read simply, Legal Services. "You must be Eleanor," he said when I entered, as if he'd been expecting me. He was younger than I'd anticipated, maybe 40, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Troy said you might come. You knew my son?" "We met 6 months ago. He needed specialized legal advice." Mateo gestured to a chair. "I've been waiting for you since I heard about the accident." I showed him the SD card. He left this. Mateo nodded, unsurprised. "Troy was thorough. Did you read the whole file?" "Enough to understand that my grandson isn't biologically related to us, and that my daughter-in-law conspired to defraud my son." "It's more complicated than that," Mateo said, taking the card. "Troy discovered that Lena and her actual partner, a man named Drew Palmer, have done this before. They target wealthy individuals. Lena seduces them, gets pregnant with Drew's child, secures legal ties through marriage, then finds ways to access the victim's assets." "The accident," I whispered, a terrible thought forming. Mateo's expression softened. "Troy suspected they might be planning something drastic, which is why he came to me. We had no proof then, but he wanted contingencies in place." "What kind of contingencies?" "A revised will, for one. Audio recordings of conversations with Lena where she unknowingly contradicts herself about Gabriel's paternity. And most importantly, a paternity test performed discreetly that proves Gabriel isn't his biological child." Hope fluttered in my chest. "So the will she showed me may not be the most recent one," Mateo confirmed. "But we need to tread carefully. If Lena suspects you know anything, she could accelerate her plans." She's already trying to force me out of my home. Mateo's brow furrowed. That's unexpected. The real will explicitly leaves your home to you. He opened his drawer, pulling out a thick folder. Troy filed this with the court 3 months ago. It should have automatically triggered upon his death. A cold weight settled in my stomach. Unless someone intercepted it. Or paid someone to bury it, Mateo agreed grimly. Over the next week, Mateo and I worked tirelessly, piecing together Troy's evidence. We discovered that Drew Palmer had begun working at the county records office 2 months before Troy's death, a position that would give him access to newly filed wills. They're always one step ahead, I said, frustration building as another lead turned cold. How are we supposed to fight them when they've planned for everything? Not everything, Mateo reminded me. They don't know about this. He tapped the SD card. And they don't know about me. We needed more than just the evidence on the card. We needed Lena to incriminate herself directly, to admit what she'd done in a way that couldn't be dismissed. She's coming to the house tomorrow, I told Mateo, to oversee the packing of my things. She's bringing Gabriel. Mateo considered this. That might be our opportunity. The plan was simple, but risky. Mateo would come as my moving consultant, wearing glasses with a hidden camera. I would engage Lena in conversation about the will and Troy's suspicions, just enough to make her defensive without revealing everything we knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Troy, alone in his final moments, perhaps realizing too late what Lena was capable of. Had the truck driver really fallen asleep? Or was there more to the story? The police report mentioned mechanical failure in Troy's car. The brakes had malfunctioned. Just coincidence? The next morning, Lena arrived promptly at 9, Gabriel's small hand clutched in hers. Behind them was a man I recognized from photographs as Drew Palmer, though Lena introduced him as my friend who's helping with the heavy lifting. "Grandma!" Gabriel broke free, running to hug my legs. At 4 years old, he was the spitting image of Drew, though I'd never noticed the resemblance before. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, hugging him close, breathing in his little boy smell of shampoo and apple juice. Lena's eyes narrowed. "Gabriel, remember what we talked about? We're not staying long." Mateo arrived 15 minutes later, clipboard in hand, glasses perched on his nose. "Mrs. Paige, I'm from Senior Transitions. I understand you need help organizing your move?" Lena immediately took charge, pointing out furniture she claimed as family heirlooms and dictating which of my personal belongings should be donated. Drew wandered the house, opening cabinets and drawers, presumably searching for valuables. I caught Mateo's eye, and he nodded slightly. "Time to start." "Lena," I said, keeping my voice casual, "I found some of Troy's old papers yesterday. He mentioned something about updating his will recently. Do you know anything about that?" Her hand froze on the vase she was examining. "No, the will we showed you was the only one, filed when we got married." "That's strange," I continued, heart-hammering, "because I distinctly remember him mentioning changes a few months ago, something about protecting Gabriel's future." Drew appeared in the doorway, his posture suddenly alert. Lena shot him a warning glance. "Troy never changed his will," she said firmly. "I would have known. We shared everything." "Not quite everything," I murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. Her eyes flashed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I sighed, turning to a photo of Troy holding newborn Gabriel. He loved that boy so much. Biological or not, he would have moved mountains for him. The room went deadly silent. Gabriel was in the next room, playing with old toys Troy had kept at my house. "You don't know what you're talking about," Lena hissed. "Don't I?" Troy knew Lena. Before he died, he knew Gabriel wasn't his. Drew moved toward me, but Mateo stepped between us, his clipboard raised slightly. "Mrs. Porter," Mateo said calmly, using Lena's married name, "perhaps we should all sit down and discuss this rationally." "There's nothing to discuss," Lena snapped, "and you can leave. I didn't authorize a moving consultant." I met her gaze steadily. "Troy left me a letter. And evidence. He knew about you and Drew. He knew about the others before him." Color drained from Lena's face. Drew grabbed her arm, whispering urgently in her ear. "You're bluffing," she said finally. "If you had anything real, you would have gone to the police already." "Maybe I have," I bluffed. "Maybe they're building a case as we speak." Drew pulled Lena aside, their heated whispers growing more intense. I glanced at Mateo, who subtly adjusted his glasses, ensuring the camera captured everything. When they returned, Lena's composure had returned. "Eleanor, grief makes people imagine things. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. And bringing up these wild accusations will only hurt Gabriel in the long run." I want what's best for Gabriel, I said truthfully. He deserves to grow up knowing he was loved unconditionally by his father, his real father, the man who raised him. Something flickered across Lena's face. Guilt? Fear? It vanished too quickly to identify. We're done here, she announced. The movers will arrive next week. Have your things ready. She turned to leave, then paused. And Eleanor? If you continue spreading these delusions about Gabriel's paternity, I'll file for a restraining order. I won't have you confusing my son with lies. After they left, taking Gabriel with them, Mateo removed his glasses. We got something, but not enough. She never explicitly admitted anything. My shoulders slumped. So we failed. Not entirely, Mateo said. She revealed she knows more than she's letting on. An innocent person would have been shocked by your accusations, not defensive. And did you notice how quickly Drew intervened? That's not normal behavior for just a friend helping with moving. What now? Now, Mateo said, checking his watch, we follow my original plan. I've filed emergency motions with the court based on Troy's real will and the evidence we have. But we need more something concrete that proves not just the paternity fraud, but their involvement in Troy's death. A chill ran through me. You really think they? Mateo's expression was grim. The brake lines on Troy's car were cut, Eleanor. The police ruled it as wear and tear, but Troy had his car serviced 2 weeks before the accident. The mechanic's report is on that SD card. Everything was in perfect condition. I sank into a chair, the full weight of their betrayal crushing me anew. They hadn't just lied to Troy, they had killed him. We need to be careful, Mateo warned. If they suspect we know about the accident, you could be in danger too. That night, alone in my house, every creak and shadow made me jump. I moved Troy's chest set to my bedroom, the SD card now hidden in a different piece, the Black Queen. I wouldn't put it past Lena and Drew to return while I was sleeping. My phone rang just after midnight. Unknown number. Hello? I answered cautiously. Mrs. Paige? A woman's voice, unfamiliar and hushed. My name is Valerie. I used to work for Lena and... I think we need to talk. Can we meet? Valerie whispered through the phone. Not at your house. Somewhere public but quiet. The library, I suggested, thinking quickly. The one downtown. They have private study rooms. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. She hung up before I could ask more questions. I called Mateo immediately, the darkness of my bedroom suddenly menacing. I don't like it, he said after I explained. Could be a trap. Or it could be exactly what we need, I countered. You said yourself we need more evidence. Mateo sighed. I'll be there too then. Different table, watching. Don't go alone. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept replaying memories of Troy growing up, teaching him to ride a bike, bandaging skinned knees, watching him graduate with honors. How had my gentle, brilliant boy ended up married to a woman who valued his death more than his life? The library was quiet when I arrived the next morning. Just a few university students hunched over laptops. I secured a study room in the back corner, positioned so I could see anyone approaching. Mateo sat near the reference section, pretending to read a law journal. At precisely 10 a.m., a petite woman with anxious eyes entered. She scanned the room, spotted me, and walked over with quick, nervous steps. Mrs. Paige? She asked, sliding into the chair opposite mine. Valerie, I presume? She nodded, glancing over her shoulder. I don't have much time. They think I'm at a job interview. They? Lena and Drew. She pulled a tissue from her purse, twisting it between her fingers. I was their nanny for Gabriel, and for the others. My breath caught. Other children? 3 altogether. Different fathers, different targets. Her voice dropped lower. I didn't know what they were doing at first. I thought Lena was just unlucky in love, a single mom needing help. Then I overheard things, saw things. Like what? Bank statements from offshore accounts. Conversations about life insurance policies, plans for accidents. She swallowed hard. They call it the exit strategy. Cold dread pooled in my stomach. And my son? Was he an exit strategy? Tears filled Valerie's eyes. Your son was different. He figured it out sooner than the others. Drew was nervous about him, said he asked too many questions. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small notebook. I kept records, dates, conversations I overheard. I thought maybe someday I could help one of the families. Then I saw your picture with Troy, and you reminded me of my own mother. The notebook contained meticulous entries spanning 3 years, times Drew visited while Troy was working late. Phone calls Lena made discussing the plan. Most damning was an entry from 1 week before Troy's accident. Drew borrowed tools from garage, mentioned something about brake lines being a clean way. Lena worried about insurance investigation. Drew said mechanical failures happen all the time to older models. My hands trembled. Why are you showing me this? Because they're planning to do it again, Valerie said, her voice breaking. Not to you, you don't have enough money to bother with, but I heard them arguing about the next target, some tech investor they met at a charity gala. And because, she hesitated, because Gabriel asks about his father every night, about you too. Lena told him you don't want to see him anymore. Rage and grief collided inside me. That's a lie. I love that boy. I know, I've seen the pictures Troy kept, heard how he talked about you. Valerie checked her watch nervously. I should go. They check my phone's location sometimes. Wait, I said, reaching for her arm. What do they plan to do with Gabriel? Her expression darkened. Use him, like they always do. The biological child of a wealthy man makes the con easier, creates a connection, a reason for the mark to trust Lena. And Drew? He's Gabriel's father, but he lets Lena use him this way? Drew doesn't care about anyone but himself, Valerie said bitterly. The children are just tools to him, assets. After she left, Mateo joined me in the study room. His face was grave as he examined Valerie's notebook. This is exactly what we needed, he said. With this and Troy's evidence, we can go to the police. They'll have to investigate the accident now. But when we arrived at the police station that afternoon, we were met with unexpected resistance. I understand your concerns, Mrs. Paige, the detective said, barely glancing at the materials we'd brought. But the case was closed months ago. Mechanical failure, unless you have definitive proof of tampering. What about the notebook? I pressed. The witness testimony? He shrugged. Hearsay. The word of a nanny against two respectable citizens with no criminal record. And these dates and conversations she allegedly overheard? No recordings to back them up. Mateo leaned forward. What about the paternity fraud? The evidence of previous cons? The detective's eyes flicked toward his office door, then back to us. Look, he said, lowering his voice. Between us, someone's been making calls about this case. Someone with influence. My hands are tied unless you bring me ironclad evidence. Outside the station, Mateo kicked a trash can in frustration. They've gotten to the police too. Probably donations to the department or connections with the captain. What now? I asked, feeling defeat settling over me. We go back to the original plan, Mateo said grimly. Court hearing for the will contestation is in 3 days. We present everything we have to the judge directly. But when we returned to my house, we discovered it had been ransacked. Drawers emptied, furniture upended, picture frames smashed. The chest set in my bedroom had been broken apart, each piece cracked open. The SD card, I gasped, rushing to check the Black Queen where I'd hidden it. Gone. They knew, Mateo said, surveying the damage. Someone told them. Valerie? He shook his head. I don't think so. They must have followed us to the library, seen us talking with her. That night I stayed at Mateo's apartment, too afraid to remain in my violated home. The court hearing loomed, but without the SD card, our case felt significantly weakened. The morning of the hearing, Mateo received a text from an unknown number. Changes of plan. Judge Matthews replaced with Judge Wilson. Connections to city developers. Bad news. They've switched judges, Mateo explained, showing me the message. Wilson has ties to real estate developers that Lena and Drew have worked with before. So we've lost, I said, my voice hollow. Mateo adjusted his tie, determination hardening his features. Not yet. We still have Valerie's notebook. And I have one last card to play. The courtroom was nearly empty when we arrived. Just a court reporter, the bailiff, and a clerk shuffling papers. Lena entered with her attorney, a slick-looking man whose suit probably cost more than my car. Drew wasn't with her. Judge Wilson, a severe-looking woman with steel-gray hair, called the court to order. We're here regarding the contested will of Troy Paige. I understand there's a dispute between the deceased's mother and his widow? Lena's attorney stood. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. My client, as Mr. Paige's legal wife and the mother of his child, is the rightful heir to all assets according to the will filed 3 years ago. Mrs. Paige Sr. is making baseless accusations due to grief and financial desperation. Mateo rose. Your Honor, we contest that will's validity on multiple grounds. First, Mr. Paige filed an updated will 3 months before his death. Second, We have evidence of fraud and criminal conspiracy involving Mrs. Porter and her accomplice, Drew Palmer. Judge Wilson frowned. Serious accusations require serious evidence, counselor. Where is this updated will? That's the issue, Your Honor. We believe it was deliberately intercepted and suppressed by Mr. Palmer, who conveniently began working at the county records office shortly before Mr. Palmer Paige's death. The judge's eyebrow arched skeptically. And your proof of this conspiracy? Mateo hesitated. Without the SD card, we had only Valerie's notebook, not enough to prove tampering with court documents. We had extensive digital evidence, Your Honor, but Mrs. Paige's home was broken into yesterday, and that evidence was stolen. Lena's attorney scoffed. Convenient excuse for lack of evidence, Your Honor. Perhaps because there never was any evidence. The proceedings continued downhill from there. Judge Wilson repeatedly sustained objections from Lena's attorney, blocking Mateo's attempts to introduce Valerie's testimony. When Mateo tried to present the notebook, the judge dismissed it as unauthenticated hearsay. By midday, it was clear we were losing. Lena sat smugly beside her attorney, occasionally shooting me triumphant glances. During a brief recess, Mateo pulled me into an empty conference room. This isn't working, he admitted. Wilson has clearly made her decision already. So that's it? I asked, despair washing over me. They kill my son, steal my grandson, take my home, and get away with it all? Mateo's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked up with renewed energy. Maybe not. My contact at the police department just came through with something. They've located Valerie, and she's agreed to make an official statement. Will that be enough? Not alone, Mateo said, but combined with what I've been working on separately. He trailed off, checking his watch. The hearing resumes in 10 minutes. I need you to stall. How am I supposed to stall a judge who's already decided against us? Ask to make a personal statement. Talk about Troy, about Gabriel. Make it emotional, but genuine. I need 15 minutes. When court resumed, Mateo was nowhere to be seen. Judge Wilson glanced at his empty chair. Is counsel for the contestant not returning? I stood, my heart pounding. Your Honor, while we wait for Mr. Reyes, I'd like to make a personal statement, if the court permits. Wilson looked irritated but nodded. Proceed, Mrs. Paige. I walked to the front of the courtroom facing the judge directly. Your Honor, this case isn't really about money or property. It's about justice for my son, who was a brilliant, kind man. It's about truth for my grandson, who deserves to know how much his father loved him, biology notwithstanding. I spoke about Troy growing up, about his intelligence and generosity, about how he'd loved Gabriel unconditionally, even after suspecting he wasn't biologically his, about how the thought that someone had deliberately harmed him for financial gain was unbearable. My son trusted the legal system, Your Honor. He believed in justice. That's why he came to a lawyer when he suspected something was wrong in his marriage. That's why he filed a new will, to protect those he truly loved. I could see Judge Wilson's expression softening slightly. Lena shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Just as I was running out of things to say, the courtroom doors burst open. Mateo entered, followed by a police detective, Valerie, and, most surprisingly, Drew Palmer in handcuffs. Your Honor, Mateo announced, I apologize for the interruption, but critical new evidence has just come to light. Judge Wilson looked between Drew and Lena, whose face had gone ash white. What is the meaning of this? The detective stepped forward. Your Honor, we've arrested Mr. Palmer for evidence tampering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and as an accessory to vehicular homicide. Mr. Palmer has agreed to provide testimony against Mrs. Porter in exchange for consideration in sentencing. Lena leapt to her feet. Drew, what are you doing? Shut up. Sit down, Mrs. Porter, Judge Wilson ordered sharply. Detective, proceed. The detective explained that Drew had cracked under questioning, admitting he'd tampered with Troy's car before the accident. He'd also confessed to removing Troy's updated will from court records and detailed 3 previous similar schemes with Lena. Furthermore, the detective continued, we've recovered digital evidence from Mr. Palmer's cloud storage containing the same files that were stolen from Mrs. Paige's home, including voice recordings of Mrs. Porter discussing their plans. Lena's attorney looked stunned. Your Honor, my client had no knowledge of— Save it, Drew interrupted bitterly. She knew everything. The whole thing was her idea from the beginning. She's done this before, and she'll do it again if she gets away with it. Judge Wilson banged her gavel as Lena began shouting accusations at Drew. Order, Mrs. Porter, control yourself or you'll be held in contempt. The hearing was immediately suspended pending criminal investigation. As officers led both Drew and Lena away, Lena locked eyes with me, her gaze burning with hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Gabriel is still legally mine." For the first time since Troy's death, I smiled with genuine relief. "Actually, he's not." Mateo stepped forward, producing a document. "This is Troy's real will, retrieved from the secure backup he created. It specifies that in the event of his death, if evidence proves Gabriel is not his biological child, custody transfers to Mrs. Paige, with a trust established for Gabriel's education and care." 2 weeks later, I stood in my kitchen, legally mine again, making pancakes for Gabriel. He sat at the counter, swinging his legs, chattering about the toy trucks Troy had given him last Christmas. "When is Mommy coming back?" he asked, not for the first time. "Not for a very long time," I answered gently, "but you and I are going to be just fine." Valerie, now Gabriel's nanny under much better circumstances, entered with his backpack. "Ready for the park, little man?" As they headed out, Mateo arrived with a stack of papers. "Final documentation," he explained, setting them on the counter. "The house is officially yours again. The trust for Gabriel is established, and the insurance company has agreed to pay out Troy's policy now that his death has been ruled a homicide." "What about Lena and Drew?" "Both facing multiple charges. Drew's cooperation means he'll serve less time, but still substantial. Lena's looking at 20 years minimum. And the investigation has reopened 2 previous cases, the accidental deaths of her former husbands." I sank into a chair, relief and grief mingling. "Troy would be grateful to you." "He did most of the work himself," Mateo said, his voice gentle, "setting up the evidence, creating backups, finding me. He knew something might happen to him, and he wanted to make sure you and Gabriel would be protected." Through the window, I could see Gabriel playing in the yard, laughing, as Valerie pushed him on the swing Troy had installed years ago. "You know," Mateo said, following my gaze, "Troy told me something once that stuck with me. He said, 'My mother taught me that patience isn't just waiting, it's planning, watching, and knowing when to act.' He was a lot like you, Eleanor." I smiled, thinking of my quiet, observant son who had outsmarted his killers from beyond the grave, who had entrusted me with his most precious gift, his son, in every way that mattered. "Justice doesn't always look how we expect," I said. But Troy found a way to make sure it was served. That evening, as I tucked Gabriel into bed, in the same room where Troy once slept, he asked me to tell him a story about his dad. "Your father," I began, "was the smartest, kindest man I ever knew. And do you know what he loved most in the whole world?" Gabriel's eyes were already drooping. "What?" "You," I whispered, kissing his forehead. "Always you." If this story of a grandmother's determination to get justice for her son touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of resilience and revenge. What would you have done in Eleanor's situation? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, sometimes justice takes patience, but it always finds a way.